Well, good morning to the participants of the UCGA Family Business and Corporate Governance presentation. I had a chance to listen to it, not in Russian. I saw only the translation, and I've been asked to comment on it. So first, let me tell you a little bit about who I am. I'm Harry Korine. I teach corporate governance and strategy at London Business School and at INSEAD. And I also consult with a wide variety of family businesses. With UCGA, I've been working for the last three and a half years, really, coming to Ukraine regularly to teach corporate governance, to work with different entities. We've had in the courses of UCGA, we've had people from the government, people from family businesses, people from SMEs, all kinds of companies. And this is special for family businesses. And I wanted to talk with you about this a little bit because I really enjoyed, I thought the presentations by Jana, by Vlad, of course, by Andre and Peter were great. And I wanted to give my comments. So what I decided to do was to focus on one comment by each of the participants.
Я вижу очень сильный триггер, который может сработать или выступить драйвером роста количества бордов. И я лично считаю, что эта штука хорошая, верю в ее эффективность, являюсь адептом. Это как раз переход бизнеса от фаундера
ко второму поколению.
А сейчас мы к этому пришли. То есть это практически у нас фаундеров уже скоро не останется. Но я имею в виду, те, которые начинали бизнес 25 лет назад. Ну, то есть уже они уже все возраста 70+.
And I'll start with Jana's comment. She said something really interesting. She said, you know, thinking about corporate governance, do you have to think about corporate governance? And she said, well, the fact that many Ukrainian family businesses are now or will soon be in a generational transition is a good time or a natural time to think about corporate governance. And I thought that was a great remark, and I wanted to pick up on that. I mean, from my experience, it is often when the founder is thinking about handing off to his or her children or to the next generation that they start thinking about corporate governance. Now, to me, that's already late to think about it, but it doesn't mean better late than never, right? So it is a good time to think about it. Why? You think about it, when people start a business, they usually don't think about corporate governance. Maybe they should, but they don't. An entrepreneur who is also a manager and he's also the owner, he doesn't really need to think about corporate governance. Corporate governance is in the shower. He talks to himself. When one person is running a company and it's that person's company, corporate governance kind of happens in the shower, right? Between when you talk to yourself, well, as an owner, what would I do? As a manager, what would I do? And as the business becomes bigger, and as you start to think about it as a family business, you also don't necessarily think about corporate governance because, you know, you have the glue of the family. Why do you need corporate governance? Why do you need rules and procedures and so forth? Family they trust each other. Everybody will be fine. Now, that may or may not be true, right? And especially as the business becomes bigger. But when you come to a generational transition, that means when you start to hand off some of the responsibilities, some of the power to the younger generation, you start to ask questions. You ask questions about leadership. Is the younger generation up to the task? Are they ready for this? You start to ask questions about strategy. Is the company going in the right direction, or is the direction need to be thought through over the next, for what happens after the founder or after the leader? And you start to think, when you're doing generational transition, you start to think about the long term. So this generational transition is really the natural time to think about corporate governance. Now, how do you start about this? Where do you start thinking about corporate governance? Well, to start thinking about corporate governance, it's really important to understand what it's about. Corporate governance is it's not just the rules and having a board and having shareholders agreements and so forth. That's all really the means. But what are we trying to achieve with corporate governance? You're trying to achieve a kind of guarantee that the business, the company, will continue to live. So really, for the founder or the entrepreneur, the corporate governance helps you sleep at night, helps you sleep in the knowledge that the company will go on, right? And for the company to go on and to continue to be successful, what we find is that it's important to think about accountability, which means systems and controls so that you can measure what's actually happening, and power. And to think about power means to say who is making decisions and make sure that that who is making decisions has some limits. So that's what corporate governance is. It's accountability and power, better systems and definitions of who has what kind of power. And again, that's important, especially important when you start thinking about the long-term and generational transition. Maybe one more point about generational transition. You know, many founder-led companies don't think formally about strategy, we find. But when you start to say, oh, I'm going to be handing off this business, or at some point I won't be running it anymore, you start to think about strategy. And corporate governance and strategy really are not separate. Because when you think about strategy, you're thinking about what areas should the business go. And that also means what kind of risk and how do you prepare for that risk? And that goes into corporate governance, right? Who has the power and who is accountable? How is the accountability ensured? So when Jana said that corporate governance is generational transition is a good time to start thinking about corporate governance, or a natural time to start thinking about corporate governance in a family firm, she's right. Again, I think it's a bit late, but it's not a bad time. And it forces you to think about, will this company, what does it take for this business or this company to be successful 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years from now? And that's a long-term view, and that's when corporate governance helps you kind of sleep at night. And so I find lots of companies that I look at, family businesses, will be in generational transition that they start to think about corporate governance. In fact, sometimes, and not infrequently, it's the younger generation that comes to me and says, you know, how can we get our fathers to think about corporate governance? Because they think they're going to just go on forever. But they're starting to get older. I'm starting to take more responsibility in the business. The younger generation says, we need something in the way of corporate governance. So, so much for Jana's comment. I agree with it. And I think it is the right time, or a good time, to think about it. I want to switch now to a comment that Vlad made.
Я хочу, чтобы мы немножко поговорили о специфике работы борда именно в семейной компании. Да? То есть мы все с вами работаем с членами семьи, которые вовлечены в бизнес, с их родственниками, с их женами, с их детьми, племянницами, внуками, внучками и так далее. И ну, вот в одном из бордов, в котором мы работаем с Андреем, там 3 поколения работают. Родители, дети, братья и их дети. Они все работают в менеджменте. И вот какие у вас ощущения по поводу, потому что, допустим, Петр точно, он знает разницу между семейной и несемейной компанией. Вот какие у вас ощущения, когда вы говорите о семейной компании, о работе в семейной компании?
He made lots of good comments, obviously, but he has a lot of experience. But one comment struck me, and I wanted to pick up on it. He talked about the board of directors in a family company. And he said it's not the same as the board of directors in a listed company or the board of directors in a state-owned enterprise. He's right. So I said, let me give some detail on what I think the necessary characteristics are of the board in a family company. What should it do? Who should be on it? What should it do? So first, it's important to understand the board of directors is one of the main instruments for corporate governance. But it's not the only one. Control systems, as I talked about earlier, measurement, accounting, agreements between shareholders, role definitions, who does what, all this is part of corporate governance. The board of directors has a special position because the board of directors is supposed to be thinking about the good of the company, not its own good, not individual good. So that's why a board of directors is a nice thing, because it starts to think about the long term. Remember what I said about the long term, and about the good of the company. So a good board of directors can help ensure accountability and define or limit power. So think about the founder who is thinking about handing off his business. And I worked, for example, with a Russian company where this was the situation. And he sets up all the rules and so forth, but he doesn't have a board of directors. And he has strong management. Now there's the real risk that the strong management will eat up the company or do things with the company that the founder doesn't want before the children are really old enough to take control. And that is where a good board of directors, for example, is absolutely necessary. And that's what we recommended and are implementing in that company. So Vlad said, in a family company, the board acts at the pleasure of the family, and you can get rid of them whenever you want. That's true, but that is not maybe, you don't want a board of directors which is just agreeing with whatever the family says. Then you don't have a good board of directors. Then just as well not have one. I think you need a board of directors. On a board of directors, you need people who are competent and who really care about the business. You also obviously need people who the family can trust. That doesn't mean only your friends, but it does mean people that you have a relationship with, that you think are trustworthy, because you're actually trusting them with a lot, the responsibility to some extent for the future of the business. These people who care about the business and have the trust of the family should also work to keep family disputes out of the business. A board of directors for a business should be looking at the business and not at disputes, if there are any, between brothers and sisters or between children and parents. And I think finally you need people who are able to say no to the family at some point. But if you have people who say yes all the time, you don't have a useful board. You're just paying them for being on the board. Now, you see, ideally, a board of directors offers value to the family business as control, as I said earlier, control, accountability, as a limit on power. If one manager, for example, in this Russian company takes too much power because the founder is not there anymore, the board of directors can limit that. But a board of directors can also be a creative force.
Крутой board-member, который работает с семьей, должен понимать, что фактор личных взаимоотношений в семье может оказаться более важен, чем фактор просто бизнес-результата. И иногда семья может жертвовать бизнес-результатом для достижения лучших взаимоотношений, и это правильное решение. И вот человек должен обладать достаточно высоким эмоциональным интеллектом для того, чтобы это сделать.
Я вот полностью согласен с Андреем. Явно у него большой опыт общения с разными семьями бизнесовыми. Я бы хотел добавить, что ни в коем случае нельзя оказаться вовлеченным в семейные конфликты. Вот у них там явно есть сложные отношения между рядом членов семьи. И даже ты про какие-то слышишь про эти отношения. Но не дай бог ты встанешь на сторону какого-то члена семьи. Вот не дай бог, потому что они-то всегда помирятся, потому что они семья, а ты окажешься в конце концов врагом всех.
What is real independence? And then why is it so important? So real independence is defined, generally defined, as has three components. First, that a real independent is not somebody who has been a manager in the past. In other words, not the former CEO or the former CFO of the company. Somebody who has not had past management experience in the company. That's first. The second, that the person is not implicated in the business in one way or another. In other words, the lawyer of the business who makes 20% of his law firm's fees from the business is not independent. Or the banker who is lending money to the company is not independent. The shareholder is also not independent. So that's the second point. Real independence means you don't have a business interest in the company. If you've been a long time on the board of a company, you're not considered independent anymore. Why? Because you are acting as if you're one of the people. You're one of the family, so to speak. So somebody who's been 10 years on the board of a company is not considered independent. There's a freshness component to being independent. All right, and that makes a lot of sense if you think about it, right? If you're not, if you've been there forever, how do you have something new and creative and different to say? So what we say about fresh is maybe that you should be, you know, it takes maybe 1 or 2 years for a board member to start to function really well inside a company. 5 or 6 years, they're not really fresh anymore. So that sweet spot of a board member is between year 1 and year 5, or between 2 and year 6. Now, important is that independence, Peter and Andre's point, is also of the mind. So these people should not be dependent on the money that you're giving them or the prestige that you're giving them. They should be free to say what they think, right? A colleague of mine once said, never accept a board job that you can't afford to lose. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. So when you put together your independence on your board, you want different competences, different styles, also different demographics, young, old, men, women. And that's especially important in a family company because you're drawing from a narrower base generally. So a board can give you more breadth, more scope. And a lot of family companies who have a board, they try to find really a wide scope to give them that width. So in the very best case, an independent director can be a sparring partner for management and for ownership, and offer really fresh, valuable advice, support change. But for that to happen, even the very strongest people that you have on this board have to work with the company, and they have to spend time. So building a good board is an investment of money. Yeah, you have to pay them something, and time. You can't expect even this board of stars to work well together, first of all, but work with the company. They need to understand the company. All right, I'm ready to conclude. I'll just make a few more remarks, and I know this is not, I'd love to talk to you more, but the basic question is, does a family company need corporate governance? Do you need corporate governance? I think you have to ask yourself that. You need corporate governance if your business is starting to become more complex, if you're thinking about handing off power, if you want to have this outside input of independent directors. Now, so corporate governance costs time and money. I hope that's clear. And it's not really something that you get a financial benefit right away, like selling whatever you're selling. It's an investment in the future of the company. And what I would say is, if you do make that investment, and like Jana said, generational transition is a good time to think about it, then do it right. So if you do invest in corporate governance, do it right, which means get advice, get the best people, and spend time making it work. That's the advice I'd leave you with. Okay, thank you.